I've always been an avid hiker, but nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced in the Blackwood Forest. It was supposed to be a routine 3-day trek, a chance to clear my head and escape the chaos of city life. Little did I know that those woods held secrets darker than the deepest shadows. The first day was uneventful. I set up camp as the sun dipped below the tree-line, the forest around me alive with the usual sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves. As night fell, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The sound seemed to fade away, replaced by an unnatural silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to my imagination running wild in the unfamiliar surroundings. But as I lay in my tent that night, I could have sworn I heard whispers carried on the wind, too faint to make out but unmistakably there. Dawn broke, and with it came a sense of relief. I packed up camp and continued my hike, pushing deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to grow denser, their branches intertwining overhead to block out most of the sunlight. As I walked, I noticed strange markings carved into some of the trunks, symbols I didn't recognize, but which filled me with an inexplicable sense of dread. It was mid-afternoon when I came across the first real sign that something was terribly wrong. In a small clearing, I found a backpack, tattered and weathered as if it had been there for months. As I approached to investigate, a cold wind whipped through the clearing, carrying with it a whisper that made my blood run cold. Turn back. I spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. Just the endless expanse of trees, watching silently. I should have listened. I should have turned around right then and there. But curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed on. As night fell on the second day, the forest seemed to come alive in all the wrong ways. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, always disappearing when I turned to look. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, though I still couldn't make out the words. I made camp in a small cave, hoping its walls would offer some protection from whatever was out there. As I huddled by my small fire, I heard a twig snap just outside. Then another. Footsteps, slowly circling the cave entrance. Hello? I called out, my voice shaking. Is someone there? The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a voice, low and gravelly, spoke from just outside the cave. You shouldn't have come here, traveler. These woods don't take kindly to outsiders. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my flashlight. Who are you? What do you want? But when I shone the light outside, there was no one there. Just the dark forest, and in the dirt, a single footprint that looked far too large and misshapen to be human. Sleep was impossible after that. I spent the night with my back to the cave wall, jumping at every sound. When dawn finally broke, I wasted no time breaking camp. I had to get out of there. But as I tried to retrace my steps, nothing looked familiar. The trees all blended together, and no matter which direction I went, I couldn't find the trail. It was as if the forest itself was shifting around me, trying to keep me trapped. As panic began to set in, I stumbled into another clearing. In the center stood a circle of stones, each one carved with the same strange symbols I'd seen on the trees. And in the middle of the circle was a sight that turned my blood to ice, a pile of bones, unmistakably human. I turned to run, but my foot caught on a root and I went sprawling. As I hit the ground, I heard that gravelly voice again, this time from right behind me. I told you, traveler. The forest doesn't like outsiders. But it does get hungry sometimes. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly through the trees, branches whipping at my face. I could hear something crashing through the underbrush behind me, gaining ground with every second. The whispers in the wind had become a deafening chorus, screaming at me to run, to hide, to give up. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, I broke through the tree line and found myself at the edge of a cliff. Far below, a river rushed over jagged rocks. Behind me, I could hear my pursuer getting closer. I was trapped. As I stood there, trying to decide if the fall or whatever was chasing me would be a quicker death, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun around, coming face to face with an old man. His eyes were wild, his clothes tattered and dirty. "Quick," he hissed, "this way." He pulled me along the cliff edge to where a narrow path led down the rocky face. Without time to think, I followed him, scrambling down the treacherous slope as fast as I dared. We reached the bottom just as an inhuman howl echoed from the forest above. The old man pulled me into a hidden cave behind a waterfall, pressing a finger to his lips. For what felt like hours, we huddled there in silence, listening to the sounds of something large moving along the cliff top. Finally, the old man spoke. "My name's Frank," he whispered. "I've been trapped in these woods for I don't even know how long anymore. Months? Years? Time doesn't work right here." "What was that thing?" I asked, my voice hoarse with fear. Frank shook his head. "I don't know. Some kind of guardian, I think. It protects the heart of the forest. Or maybe it is the heart of the forest. All I know is, it doesn't let anyone leave. But you've survived?" He nodded grimly. "Barely. I've learned some of its patterns, found safe places to hide. But I haven't found a way out. The forest, it changes. Paths that lead out one day are gone the next. And always, that thing is hunting." I slumped against the cave wall, despair washing over me. "So we're trapped here? Forever?" Frank was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe not," he said finally. "I've been studying those symbols, the ones carved everywhere. I think they're part of some kind of ritual. A way to appease the forest spirit, maybe even control it. But I haven't been able to figure it out entirely." Hope flickered in my chest. "So if we could complete this ritual, we might be able to escape, yes. But it's dangerous. One wrong move and we could make things much, much worse." I nodded, determination replacing fear. "I'll take that chance. What do we need to do?" Frank pulled out a tattered notebook, filled with sketches of the symbols we'd seen. "We need to find 7 specific markers in the forest and activate them in the right order. But they're guarded. By what? I don't know. And the guardian, it will be hunting us every step of the way." As if on cue, another howl echoed through the forest, closer this time. Frank grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with fear. "It's found our trail. We need to move, now. Are you ready?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Ready as I'll ever be. And with that, we plunged back into the dark heart of the forest in a desperate race against time and an ancient, hungry evil. The true horror, I realized, was only just beginning. As we moved through the undergrowth, every shadow seemed to hide a threat. The whispers in the wind grew more insistent, sometimes sounding like pleas for help, other times like mocking laughter. We found the first marker as the sun was setting, a stone obelisk hidden in a thicket of thorns. As Frank began to trace the symbols on its surface, the air around us grew thick and heavy. I could have sworn I saw faces in the bark of the surrounding trees, twisted in expressions of agony. "Don't look at them," Frank muttered, his hands shaking as he worked. "Whatever you do, don't acknowledge them. That's how it gets in your head." Just as he finished activating the marker, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the forest. It sounded human, but distorted, as if it was coming from underwater. "Run!" Frank yelled, grabbing my arm. We crashed through the forest, branches tearing at our clothes. Behind us, I could hear something massive moving through the trees, getting closer with each passing second. I opened my mouth to warn Frank, but no sound came out. The thing tilted its head, regarding me with that featureless face. Then, slowly, a mouth opened in the center of its face, a mouth filled with row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. "Frank," I managed to choke out. "We need to go. Now." He looked up, saw the creature, and his face went pale. "Oh God," he whispered. "It's here. The Guardian." The thing in the woods took a step towards us, its body moving in a way that defied the laws of nature. As it did, the whispers in the wind rose to a fever pitch, screaming in our minds. "Run. Hide. Die." Frank grabbed my hand, and we plunged deeper into the darkness of Blackwood Forest. The Guardian followed, its inhuman shrieks echoing through the night. And somewhere ahead lay the remaining markers, our only hope of escape from this nightmare. But as we ran, a horrible thought occurred to me. What if Frank was wrong? What if activating these markers wasn't our salvation, but instead, the final step in some terrible ritual? What if we were playing right into the forest's hands? "No," she wailed, her voice no longer that of a child but something ancient and terrible. "You don't know what you're unleashing. Please." But it was too late. Frank finished the activation, and a pulse of energy knocked us all off our feet. When I looked up, the girl was gone. In her place was a swirling vortex of darkness that seemed to pull at the very fabric of reality. Frank helped me to my feet, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and excitement. "The last marker," he said. "It has to be through there. It's our only way out." I looked at the vortex, every instinct screaming at me to run the other way. But I knew we had no choice. It was this or be trapped in these nightmare woods forever. Hand in hand, Frank and I stepped into the darkness. The world spun around us, filled with whispers and screams and visions of horrors I can't even begin to describe. And then, suddenly, we were somewhere else. We stood in a massive cavern, its walls lined with the twisted, faceless trees I'd seen earlier. In the center was a pool of inky black liquid, and floating above it was a pulsing, writhing mass of darkness. "The heart," Frank whispered. "The heart of the forest." As we watched, the mass began to take shape, forming into a creature of pure nightmare, all teeth and claws and hungry, ancient malevolence. "Welcome," it said, its voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You've done well to make it this far. But I'm afraid your journey ends here." Frank stepped forward, holding up his notebook. "We've activated 6 of the 7 markers. We can control you now. You have." I reached the altar, my hands shaking as I tried to trace the final symbol. The creature bore down on me, its maw open wide to swallow me whole. This was it. our last stand against the darkness. As I finished tracing the symbol, I silently prayed that we hadn't doomed not just ourselves, but the entire world. A blinding light erupted from the altar, and the creature's roar of triumph turned to one of pain and fury. The cavern began to shake, rocks falling from the ceiling as reality itself seemed to tear at the seams. I reached out for Frank, trying to pull him free from the fading tendrils of darkness. Our eyes met, and I saw a mix of fear and hope in his gaze. And then, everything went white. When my vision cleared, I found myself lying on the forest floor, the morning sun filtering through the canopy above. For a moment, I dared to hope it had all been a terrible nightmare. But the tattered state of my clothes and the wounds on my body told a different story. I sat up, looking around frantically for Frank. Frank! I called out, my voice hoarse. Frank, where are you? There was no response, just the usual sounds of the forest. But something felt different. The oppressive, malevolent presence that had permeated the woods was gone. The trees no longer seemed to whisper dark secrets, and the shadows held no hidden horrors. As I struggled to my feet, I noticed something clutched in my hand, Frank's notebook. The pages were charred around the edges, but the symbols and notes were still legible. It was proof that everything had really happened. I spent hours searching the area, calling for Frank, but found no trace of him. It was as if he had vanished along with the dark entity we had inadvertently awakened. The guilt and uncertainty weighed heavily on me. Had we succeeded in binding the creature, or had we simply unleashed it on the wider world? As the day wore on, I finally found my way back to the main trail. The forest that had seemed so impenetrable and maze-like before now appeared as any normal woods. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. Just as I was about to step out of the tree line, back to civilization, I heard a voice behind me. "You're leaving so soon?" I spun around, my heart racing. There, leaning against a tree, was the little girl from the cabin. But she looked different now, more human, her eyes no longer bottomless voids. She smiled, and I was relieved to see normal teeth instead of razor-sharp fangs. What are you?" I stammered. She cocked her head, considering the question. "I'm a guardian, of sorts. A spirit of the forest. What you and Frank encountered, it was a corruption, a darkness that had taken root here long ago. We couldn't fight it ourselves, so we needed someone from outside." I felt a surge of anger. "So you manipulated us? Used us as bait?" The girl's smile faded. "We did what we had to do to save not just this forest, but your world as well. If that entity had fully awakened and escaped..." She shuddered. "Your friend Frank understood the stakes. That's why he made the choice he did." "What choice? What happened to him?" She stepped closer, her eyes filled with a wisdom far beyond her apparent years. "The ritual you completed wasn't just about binding the darkness. It was about balance. A life freely given to restore harmony." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Frank had sacrificed himself to stop the entity. To save me, to save everyone. Can I at least bury him?" I asked, my voice breaking. The girl shook her head. "His physical form is gone, but his essence, it's part of the forest now. Part of what keeps the darkness at bay." She gestured around us. "He's everywhere here. in the rustle of leaves, in the song of birds, in the very earth beneath your feet. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by grief and the sheer magnitude of what had happened. The girl placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You should go now," she said softly. "Return to your world. Live the life that Frank's sacrifice has ensured you can have." I looked up at her. But what if the darkness returns? What if it tries to break free again? And always, I felt watched. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a glimpse of a little girl with knowing eyes. Other times, I'd wake in the night to find my room filled with whispers, gone the moment I turned on the light. It was a year to the day after our ordeal in Blackwood Forest that things took another dark turn. I woke to find a symbol carved into my bedroom wall, one I recognized from Frank's notebook. Below it, written in what looked disturbingly like blood, was a message. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice echoing with the power of ancient trees and hidden groves. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever horrors lay ahead. "No," I admitted. "But I don't think anyone could be ready for this." "Let's go." She nodded, a sad smile on her face. With a wave of her hand, the world around us began to shift and blur. The street faded away, replaced by towering trees and deep shadows. The whispers in the leaves grew louder, more insistent, filled with warnings and pleas for help. As we walked deeper into this liminal space between worlds, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The true test, the real horrors, still lay ahead. But I was no longer the same person who had stumbled blindly into Blackwood Forest a year ago. I was changed, marked by my experiences and the sacrifice of my friend. Whatever darkness awaited us, whatever nightmares lurked in the depths of the forest, I would face them. For Frank, for the world he gave his life to protect, and for the slim hope of finally understanding the true nature of the horrors that lurk just beyond the veil of our everyday reality. The forest closed in around us, and I felt the weight of ancient, hungry eyes upon me. This time, I told myself, I would be ready. This time, I would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The creature that wasn't Frank held in rage, redoubling its efforts to break through the barrier. Dark tendrils began to seep through the cracks, reaching for us with hungry purpose. "We don't have much time," the girl said urgently. "You need to draw the sigil. Use this." She handed me a knife, its blade glowing with an inner light. "It needs to be drawn in blood. Your blood." I stared at the knife, the magnitude of what she was asking sinking in. Will I die?" She met my gaze, her eyes ancient and sad. "I don't know. The price is different for everyone. But if we don't do this, everything dies. Not just here, but everywhere. The darkness will consume it all." The barrier cracked, the Frank thing's clawed hand punching through. In that moment, I made my decision. I gripped the knife tightly and began to carve the sigil into the bark of the largest tree in the clearing, my blood mixing with the dark sap that oozed from the wound. As I worked, I felt a change come over me. My vision blurred, and suddenly I could see the forest as it truly was, a vast, interconnected web of life and energy. And at its center, a pulsing mass of darkness, straining against the bonds we had placed on it. I could feel my life force draining with each line I drew, but I pushed on. The Frank thing broke through the barrier entirely, charging towards us with a roar of triumph. The forest spirit girl stood her ground, her form shifting and growing until she was a towering figure of bark and branch. As I completed the final line of the sigil, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing, a blinding light erupted from the tree. It spread rapidly, engulfing everything in its path. I felt myself being pulled apart, my very essence scattering to the winds. But as I faded, I saw the darkness recoil, shrieking in agony as it was forced back into the depths from which it came. The last thing I heard was the forest spirit's voice, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "It is done. Rest now, guardian. We will wake you when you are needed again." And then, darkness. I don't know how long I was gone. Time has little meaning in the space between worlds. But eventually, I felt myself being pulled back, reformed. I opened my eyes to find myself lying on the forest floor, the canopy above dappled with sunlight. For a moment, everything seemed normal. But then I noticed the changes. My skin was bark-like, tough and etched with faint lines that looked suspiciously like the binding sigil. When I moved, I could feel roots extending from my feet, connecting me to the vast network of the forest. The forest spirit girl appeared beside me, smiling. But she was different too, more human-like, less ethereal. "Welcome back," she said. Or should I say, "Welcome home." I looked around, seeing the forest with new eyes. I could feel its rhythms, its life force flowing through me. And deep below, I sensed the bound darkness, contained but ever present. What happened? What am I? "You're the new guardian," she explained. "Bound to the forest, just as it is bound to you. Your sacrifice completed the ritual, sealed the darkness away more securely than ever before." I thought of my old life, of the world I had left behind. Can I ever go back? She shook her head. "Not in the way you're thinking. But you're not trapped here. As the guardian, you can walk between worlds when needed. There will always be those who are drawn to the darkness, who might try to unleash it again. It's our job to stop them." I nodded, accepting my new role. As I did, I felt a presence beside me, not physical, but undeniably there. It was Frank, his essence now part of the forest, part of me. "I'm sorry, old friend," I whispered. "But I promise, your sacrifice won't be in vain." As if in response, a warm breeze rustled through the leaves. I smiled, feeling truly at peace for the first time since this all began. But I knew this peace was temporary. The darkness was contained, not destroyed. And out there, in the world of humans, there would always be those drawn to its power, seeking to unleash it once more. I am the guardian now, the protector of Blackwood Forest and all it contains. My story, my old life, has ended. But a new one, filled with wonders and horrors beyond imagination, has just begun. So if you find yourself in a deep, dark wood, feeling eyes upon you and hearing whispers in the wind, remember this tale. For I am watching, always watching, ready to defend against the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of your reality. And should you be foolish enough to seek that darkness out, know this, I will be waiting. For I am the forest, and the forest is me. And we do not suffer intruders lightly.